It was a quiet summer night. The starry sky stretched like a blanket over the small town, promising peace and serenity. But that night, peace would shatter into chaos. Lydia, a young journalist, often retreated to her attic with an old telescope, gazing at the stars when insomnia gripped her. The night seemed infinite and calm, until she spotted a strange flicker on the horizon. Lydia adjusted her telescope. What she saw wasn't a meteor or a plane. The flickering object pulsed with unnatural light, its glow sending faint ripples across the air. Birds in the nearby trees erupted into panicked flight. People in the town began to notice it too. His porch, high school teacher Noah was engrossed in a book, only to glance up at the sky and see the light plummet toward the ground with a blinding flash. That wasn't normal, he murmured, setting his book aside, as the light struck the earth. A faint column of smoke began to rise in the distance. Then, a scream cut through the night, sharp and chilling. Moments later, flames ignited at the edge of town. But these weren't ordinary fires. Their color burned an eerie shade of blue, spreading unnaturally fast, defying the stillness of the air. Chaos descended upon the town. Firefighters rushed to the scene, but water seemed powerless against the flames. The fires didn't consume buildings in a natural way. They advanced like living entities, purposefully trapping people in their homes. Shapes began to flicker within the blue infernos as if something alive was moving through them. From her attic, Lydia stared in disbelief. Through her telescope, she caught sight of figures emerging from the flames. They weren't human. Their forms were elongated and asymmetrical, with limbs too thin and movements too fluid. Their eyes glowed like molten metal, and with a single motion of their spindly hands, they spread the fire further. Downstairs, Lydia's younger sister Mia burst into the room, her voice trembling. "We need to leave now," she urged. Lydia stepped away from the telescope, her mind racing. "Not yet," she replied, determination hardening her voice. "We need to understand what this is. Why are they here? What do they want?" Across town, Noah had abandoned his porch and made his way toward the main square, where a crowd had gathered. Panic was contagious. People screamed, cried, and tried to flee in their cars, but the roads were blocked by advancing flames. In the center of the square, a crack had formed in the earth, glowing with an ominous light. Noah approached cautiously, but as he did, a voice echoed in his mind. "Communication will begin. Resistance is futile." The voice was metallic, reverberating, utterly alien. Noah stumbled back, his heart racing. From the glowing crack in the ground, something began to emerge, a claw-like appendage, followed by another, long and unnatural. The crowd gasped, frozen in terror. Back in the attic, Lydia and Mia could see the chaos unfolding in the square. Mia tugged at her sister's arm, her voice desperate. "We have to go, now." But Lydia hesitated. "No," she said firmly. "If we don't figure this out, there won't be anywhere left to run." As Lydia spoke, the sky lit up again. This time, 3 beams of light descended from different directions, surrounding the town like a trap. The fires intensified, and more figures emerged from the flames, their movements synchronized, their purpose unknown. The town was becoming a battlefield, but no one yet understood who or what they were fighting. Adjusting her telescope one last time, Lydia aimed it beyond the town. In the distance, faint flickers of light were visible, moving closer. Perhaps they were reinforcements, or perhaps something much worse was on its way. The flickering lights Lydia had spotted on the horizon grew brighter as the seconds ticked by. Her heart raced as questions flooded her mind. Were these lights the promise of salvation, or just another wave of destruction? She adjusted the telescope for a closer look but found no clear answers. Whatever they were moving fast, closing the distance to the town. Down in the main square, Noah struggled to steady his breath, the massive claw-like appendages emerging from the kraken. The ground now revealed a full creature. Its body was skeletal yet metallic, shimmering in the eerie blue light of the fires. Its head twisted unnaturally, like it was scanning the terrified crowd. Then, without warning, the creature unleashed a pulse of energy that rippled through, The air. People screamed as the pulse passed over them, leaving a strange ringing in their ears. Some collapsed instantly, their bodies limp, while others clutched their heads in agony. Noah backed away, trying to blend into the crowd, but the creature's glowing eyes locked onto him. It tilted its head, almost curious, before taking a slow, deliberate step forward. Noah's instincts screamed at him to run, but his legs felt like lead. He was rooted to the spot, paralyzed by fear. Back in the attic, Mia clutched Lydia's arm. "We can't just stand here. Those things are getting closer, and the fires... Look." She pointed out the window. The blue flames had spread alarmingly, fast, devouring entire blocks in minutes. Strangely, though, the fires didn't destroy the structures completely. Instead, they left behind warped metallic remnants, as if the flames were transforming everything they touched. "Something's wrong with the fire," Lydia whispered, more to herself than to Mia. "It's not burning, it's changing things." She grabbed her camera from a nearby shelf and began snapping photos of the destruction below. "If we survive this, people need to know what happened." Mia stared at her sister in disbelief. "If we survive? Lydia, we won't survive if we stay here." She grabbed a backpack and started stuffing it with essentials. "We need to get out of town now before it's too late." But before Lydia could respond, a deafening roar shook the entire house. The attic windows rattled violently, and a blinding flash lit up the room. Both sisters ducked instinctively as the roof above them groaned under an unseen pressure. When the light faded, Lydia cautiously peeked outside. Her heart nearly stopped. Hovering above the town was an enormous circular ship. Its surface pulsed with glowing blue veins, and its underside emitted the same eerie light as the fires. The ship moved with an unnatural smoothness, casting an ominous shadow over the town. From its center, a beam of light shot down, striking the crack in the square where the first creature had emerged. The beam seemed to feed energy into the ground, and more creatures began to crawl out, one after another. Noah, still frozen in the square, watched in horror as the new creatures joined the first. Each one was slightly different, some with additional limbs, others with elongated heads or spiked tails, but they all shared the same glowing eyes and unnatural movements. The original creature raised one of its clawed arms and let out a metallic shriek, as if giving an order. The new arrivals scattered, heading in all directions. Their intent was clear: total annihilation. "Lydia," Mia whispered, her voice trembling. "We have to leave. Now." Lydia finally nodded, grabbing her camera and following Mia down the attic stairs. But as they reached the front door, they saw one of the creatures approaching their street. It moved on all fours, its claws scraping against the pavement, leaving faint scorch marks behind. Its head turned sharply toward their house, and its glowing eyes narrowed. "Back inside," Lydia hissed, pulling Mia away from the door. The two sisters bolted to the kitchen, where Lydia quickly slid open a window. "We'll have to go out the back," she said, motioning for Mia to climb through. "Hurry!" As they scrambled out of the house, the creature let out a high-pitched screech. It had detected their movement. The sisters ran as fast as they could, their hearts pounding in their chests. The streets were a maze of chaos, blue flames consuming everything, people screaming, and the creatures hunting anyone in their path. Noah, meanwhile, had managed to slip away from the square and was making his way toward the outskirts of town. He had no plan, no destination, only the primal urge to survive. As he turned a corner, he spotted Lydia and Mia running in the distance. He shouted to get their attention, but his voice was drowned out by another deafening roar. He looked up just in time to see a second ship descending from the sky, its underside bristling with spindly appendages. "Dear God," he whispered, "there's more of them." The second ship released smaller drones, fast, insect-like machines that darted through the air, scanning the streets below. Noah dove behind a dumpster, holding his breath as one of the drones zipped past him. He could feel its energy, like static electricity prickling his skin. When it moved on, he let out a shaky sigh and peered around the corner. Lydia and Mia were gone. As the creatures spread their destruction and more ships descended from the sky, the town teetered on the edge of collapse. For Lydia, Mia, and Noah, survival meant more than just escaping the flames. It meant uncovering the truth behind the invasion. But with the fires consuming everything and the alien forces multiplying, time was running out. Lydia and Mia sprinted through the narrow back alleys of their burning town, each step feeling heavier as the air thickened with smoke, and an unnatural heat radiated from the strange blue flames. The creatures were everywhere now, stalking the streets, their glowing eyes scanning for movement. The sisters knew they couldn't outrun them forever. "Where are we even going?" Mia panted, clutching her side. The fear in her voice was undeniable. Lydia glanced over her shoulder, her mind racing. "We need to find cover, somewhere safe enough to think. We can't just run blind." Mia suddenly grabbed Lydia's arm, yanking her to a stop. "Look," she whispered, pointing to an old church at the end of the alley. The building's stone walls were blackened from the flames but still intact, its towering spire casting a long shadow. "The basement. Maybe we can hide there." Lydia hesitated. The creatures had been moving with alarming precision, as if they could sense people's presence. But the church was their best option for now. "All right," she said, "but we move. Fast." The two darted toward the church, ducking through the heavy oak doors just as one of the creatures turned into the alley behind them. Lydia pushed the door shut and wedged a pew against them as quietly as she could. The sisters stood in the dimly lit nave, their breaths shallow, listening for any sign of pursuit. "Do you think it saw us?" Mia whispered, clutching Lydia's sleeve. "I don't know," Lydia replied, scanning the room. "Let's get to the basement. Now." They found the basement entrance behind the altar and descended the narrow staircase into the cool, damp darkness below. The air was thick with the scent of old stone and mildew, but it was quiet, safe. For the moment. Mia sank to the floor, pulling her knees to her chest. "This is a nightmare. This can't be real." Lydia knelt beside her, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We're alive. That's all that matters right now. But we need to figure out what's happening. These things, they didn't just appear out of nowhere." Mia nodded, though her expression was one of doubt. "And how exactly do we figure that out? They're burning the whole town down, Lydia. There's nothing left to—" A faint hum interrupted her, growing louder with each passing second. Lydia froze, her eyes darting to the staircase. "Something's here," she whispered. The sisters pressed themselves against the cold stone wall as the hum turned into a mechanical clicking sound. Moments later, a small drone floated into the basement, its blue-lit sensors scanning the room. It hovered unnaturally still for a moment, then emitted a high-pitched beep. Lydia acted on instinct. Grabbing a piece of broken wood from the floor, she hurled it at the drone. The impact knocked it off balance, and it crashed to the ground with a shower of sparks. But the damage was done. "They'll know we're here now," Lydia said, pulling Mia to her feet. "We have to move." Meanwhile, Noah crouched in the shadows of a gutted storefront, his eyes fixed on the second alien ship that now loomed over the town. The smaller drones it had released were sweeping the area, herding the surviving townspeople toward the center square. He could see the terrified faces of those who had been captured, forced into a huddled group under the watchful eyes of the towering creatures. "What are they doing?" Noah muttered to himself. He had been a history teacher for over a decade, and his mind raced through every invasion and conquest strategy he had ever studied. This wasn't random destruction. This was systematic, deliberate. Noah's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps. He turned to see Lydia and Mia emerging from an alley, their faces pale but determined. He waved them over, relief flooding his chest. "Lydia! Mia!" The sisters spotted him and hurried to his side. "Noah!" Lydia gasped. "You're alive! Thank God." "Barely," he replied. "What about you two?" "We've been running," Mia said, her voice trembling. "Hiding. But these things, they're everywhere." Noah nodded grimly. "They're not just hunting, they're gathering people. Look." He pointed toward the square, where the crowd of captives was growing. "I don't know why, but they're keeping them alive." Lydia frowned, her journalist instincts kicking in. "They want something. This isn't just an invasion, it's a harvest." Harvest, Mia repeated, horrified. What do you mean? Before Lydia could answer, a deafening sound tore through the air. The ground shook violently as a third ship descended, this one even larger than the others. Its underside opened, revealing a massive glowing chamber. A beam of light shot down, engulfing the captive crowd. When the light faded, the people were gone. Noah stared in shock. They're taking them. For what? Mia whispered, her voice barely audible. Lydia tightened her grip on her camera. We need to find out, and we need to stop it. Stop it? Noah turned to her, incredulous. Lydia, we're just 3 people with no weapons, no plan. Sudden screech cut him off. One of the creatures had spotted them. It charged, its glowing eyes locked on their small group. Noah grabbed a broken pipe from the ground, ready to defend himself, but the creature moved too fast. Just as it was about to strike, a blinding flash of light erupted from behind it. The creature let out a metallic shriek and crumpled to the ground. Standing behind it was a figure in a black tactical suit holding a weapon that hummed with energy. Move, the figure barked, their voice distorted through a helmet. If you want to live, follow me. The 3 stared at the stranger in stunned silence. Who are you? Lydia finally managed to ask. The figure didn't answer. Instead, they turned and began walking toward the outskirts of town. You'll get your answers later. Right now, we need to get you out of here. Lydia exchanged a glance with Noah and Mia. They had no reason to trust this stranger, but staying put wasn't an option. Together, they followed the mysterious figure into the burning ruins of their town, hoping against hope that they weren't walking into another trap. The burning ruins of the town loomed like a nightmarish labyrinth. Lydia, Mia, and Noah followed the mysterious figure, their footsteps muffled by the ash-covered streets. The figure moved with purpose, barely glancing back to ensure the group was keeping up. The energy weapon in their hands hummed faintly, glowing with a soft blue light that contrasted with the chaotic alien flames around them. Where are you taking us? Lydia finally demanded, her voice edged with both fear and frustration. The figure paused, turning slightly. Through the tinted visor of their helmet, Lydia couldn't see their face. There's a resistance outpost about 2 miles from here, the figure said, their voice cold and clipped. If we make it there, you might survive the night. Resistance? Noah asked, his brow furrowed. You're saying people already knew about this? The figure's silence was answer enough. They motioned for the group to keep moving. Less talking, more running. The group pushed forward, weaving through narrow alleys and destroyed storefronts. Overhead, the alien ships loomed like silent predators, their glowing underbellies casting an eerie light over the town. The smaller drones zipped through the air, scanning for survivors, their mechanical clicks growing louder with each pass. As they approached the edge of town, the figure suddenly raised a fist, signaling them to stop. They crouched low, peering around a corner. The group followed suit, hearts pounding in their chests. Ahead, a group of creatures was gathered near a large open area where the ground had cracked and split apart. Strange blue energy pulsed from the fissures, illuminating the creatures' twisted forms. One of them held a metallic device, its claws deftly manipulating the controls. The ground beneath the fissure rumbled, and a thin column of light began to rise into the sky. They're building something, Lydia whispered, her eyes narrowing. She pulled out her camera and snapped a photo, the faint click almost drowned out by the distant hum of the alien machinery. The figure turned to her sharply. Are you insane? They'll hear that. But it was too late. One of the creature's heads snapped in their direction, its glowing eyes narrowing. It let out a guttural shriek, and the others turned in unison, their movements unnervingly synchronized. Run! The figure barked, raising their weapon and firing a blast of energy. The shot struck one of the creatures, sending it sprawling, but the others charged, their clawed limbs tearing through the rubble as they closed the distance. Lydia, Mia, and Noah bolted, their breaths coming in ragged gasps as they sprinted through the debris-strewn streets. Behind them, the alien creatures shrieked and hissed, their pursuit relentless. The figure stayed behind, firing precision shots to slow them. Down, keep going, they shouted. Don't stop! The group stumbled into what remained of a small park, its once lush greenery now reduced to smoldering ash. Lydia tripped over a fallen tree, crashing to the ground with a cry. Mia doubled back, grabbing her sister's arm and hauling her to her feet. "Come on, Lydia, we can't stop." One of the creatures lunged, its claws swiping inches from Lydia's back. Before it could strike again, a blast from the figure's weapon sent it reeling. "Move!" the figure yelled, rejoining the group. They reached the edge of the park, where an abandoned sewer entrance stood partially hidden behind a collapsed wall. The figure pried open the grate, motioning for the group to climb in. "Go! Now!" Mia hesitated, her eyes wide with fear. "What if they follow us?" "They won't," the figure said. "Not down here. Trust me." One by one, they descended into the dark, foul-smelling tunnel. The figure was the last to climb down, pulling the grate shut behind them. The distant shrieks of the creatures faded as the group ventured deeper into the tunnel, their footsteps echoing against the damp walls. The tunnels were suffocatingly narrow, the air thick with moisture and decay. Lydia held her camera tightly, her mind racing with questions. "Who are you?" she asked the figure, her voice low but insistent. "And how do you know so much about them?" The figure hesitated, then removed their helmet. A woman with short, cropped hair and sharp dark eyes stared back at them. "My name's Kael," she said. "I was part of the first resistance cell. We've been tracking these things for months." "Months," Noah repeated, incredulous. "You knew this was coming and you didn't warn anyone." Kael's jaw tightened. "We tried, but no one believed us. The government covered it up, said it was conspiracy nonsense. By the time they took us seriously, it was too late." Lydia frowned, her mind piecing together the fragments of information. "So this wasn't an accident. They've been planning this for a long time." Kael nodded. "This is a full-scale invasion. They're not here to negotiate or coexist. They're here to conquer. And it's not just this town. It's happening everywhere." Mia's voice trembled. "Then what? Are we supposed to do? We're just people. How can we fight them?" Kael's expression softened, though her eyes remained steely. "There's a weakness," she said. "We've seen it. Those beams of light they use to take people, they're powered by something, a core. If we can destroy it, we might have a chance to stop them." Lydia's grip on her camera tightened. "Then we need to find that core." Kael gave a grim smile. "That's the plan, but getting to it won't be easy. Those things are everywhere, and they'll protect the core at all costs." Noah crossed his arms, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "So, what's the next step?" Kael looked at each of them in turn. "We get to the outpost. Gather supplies, plan our attack, and then—" She took a deep breath. "We fight back." The sewer tunnels stretched on like a labyrinth, their walls slick with moisture and decay. Lydia, Mia, Noah, and Kael moved cautiously, their footsteps echoing faintly. The weight of Kael's revelations pressed down on them like the suffocating air around them. This wasn't just a battle for their town. It was a war for survival, one they were woefully unprepared for. Kael led the way, her weapon raised and her eyes scanning the shadows. "The outpost isn't far," she said quietly. "It's an old utility station. We fortified it when the first attack started." "How many people are there?" Noah asked, his voice echoing in the confined space. Kael's lips thinned. "Not many. Most of the resistance cells have been wiped out. The ones who are left, well, they're fighters, but we're spread too thin." Mia clung to Lydia's arm, her eyes wide with fear. "What happens if we can't stop them?" she whispered. Lydia didn't answer. The thought was too terrifying to entertain. Instead, she focused on the task at hand. They had to make it to the outpost, regroup, and figure out their next move. They rounded a corner. A faint hum filled the air. Kael froze, holding up a hand to signal the group to stop. "Stay quiet," she whispered. Ahead, the tunnel widened into a larger chamber. The source of the hum became clear. A drone hovered in the center of the room, its blue-lit sensors scanning the area. Beside it, two of the alien creatures stood motionless, their spindly forms illuminated by the flickering light of a damaged generator. Kael motioned for the group to move back. We'll have to find another way, she said, her voice barely audible. But as they turned to retreat, Mia accidentally kicked a loose piece of metal. The clang echoed through the chamber like a gunshot. The drone whirred to life, its sensors locking onto the group. The creatures let out guttural shrieks, their limbs snapping into motion as they charged. "Run!" Kael shouted, raising her weapon and firing. The energy blast struck the drone, sending it spiraling into the wall in a burst of sparks. She fired again, hitting one of the creatures in the chest. It collapsed with a metallic screech, but the second creature was already upon them. Lydia grabbed Mia's arm, pulling her down the tunnel as Noah swung a rusted pipe at the creature. The makeshift weapon glanced off its armored skin, and the creature retaliated with a swipe of its claw. Noah stumbled back, narrowly avoiding a fatal blow. Kael fired another shot, the energy blast tearing through the creature's torso. It crumpled to the ground, twitching before going still. "Keep moving," she barked. "We don't have time for this." The group sprinted through the tunnels, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. The hum of more drones echoed in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. Kael led them through a series of twists and turns, her knowledge of the sewer system their only saving grace. Finally, they emerged into a large chamber with a steel door embedded in the far wall. Kael rushed forward, punching a code into a keypad beside the door. "Get inside," she ordered as the door slid open. The group hurried through, and Kael slammed the door shut behind them. She leaned against it, catching her breath. "That'll hold them for a while," she said. The room they had entered was dimly lit, with makeshift tables and crates scattered around. A few people in tattered clothing looked up as the group entered. They were gaunt, their faces marked with exhaustion, but their eyes held a glimmer of determination. One of them, a man with a shaved head and a scar running down his cheek, stepped forward. "Kael," he said, his voice rough. "You made it." "Barely," Kael replied. "We've got a situation. The invaders are building something in the town center, some kind of energy conduit. We need to take it out." The man nodded grimly. "We've seen it. They're using the conduits to link their ships to the planet's core. If they finish, they'll drain this world dry." "What do you mean, drain the world?" Lydia asked, her voice trembling. The man turned to her, his expression grave. "They're not just here to destroy, they're here to consume. They'll strip the planet of its energy, its resources, everything. When they're done, there won't be anything left. Not even us." Mia sank onto a nearby crate, her face pale. "This is insane. How are we supposed to stop that?" Kael crossed her arms, her eyes hard. "We hit them where it hurts. The conduits are the key. If we can destroy them, it'll disrupt their operation. They'll have to retreat." "And how do we do that?" Noah asked. "Those things are everywhere." Kael gestured to a map spread out on one of the tables. "We'll divide into teams. One group will create a diversion, draw the creatures away from the town center. The other will plant charges on the conduit and blow it sky high." Lydia studied the map, her heart pounding. "What about the ships? Won't they just rebuild?" Kael hesitated. "That's the other part of the plan. We've identified a weak point in their ship's power systems. If we can disable one of the ships, it'll cause a chain reaction, but it's a long shot." "A long shot is better than nothing," Noah said. "What do you need us to do?" Kael looked at the group, her expression determined. "We fight. Together. If we fail, there won't be another chance." The room fell silent as the weight of their mission sank in. Outside, the hum of drones grew louder, a grim reminder of the battle waiting for them. The air was heavy with tension as Kael and her team made their final preparations. The group was divided into two units. Lydia, Kael, and a resistance fighter named Darius would infiltrate the town center to plant charges on the energy conduit, while Noah, Mia, and a small diversion team would lure the creatures away. Every second counted, and the weight of what they were about to do pressed on them all. Kael handed Lydia a small pack of explosives. "These are remote charges," she explained. "Stick them to the base of the conduit. Once we're clear, I'll trigger them. It'll cause a chain reaction, taking the whole thing out." Lydia nodded, her hands trembling as she secured the pack. What about the ships? If we destroy the conduit, won't they retaliate? Kael's expression was grim. That's why the diversion is critical. They'll think we're hitting their perimeter, not the core. It's our only chance. Noah and Mia crouched behind the remnants of a collapsed building on the outskirts of the town. The diversion team had scavenged whatever they could find. Molotov, cocktails, crude traps, and a handful of salvaged resistance weapons. They didn't need to win the fight. They just needed to make enough noise to draw the creatures away. "Stay close to me," Noah said, his voice low but firm. "Whatever happens, don't stop moving." Mia nodded, clutching a makeshift weapon, a metal pipe wrapped in cloth soaked with fuel. She looked at Noah, her fear barely contained. "Do you think this will work?" "It has to," he replied, though his own doubts gnawed at him. "Let's go." Noah lit the cloth on Mia's pipe, and together they hurled their improvised weapons toward a group of creatures near a patrol drone. The explosions lit up the night, sending plumes of fire into the sky. The creatures turned sharply, their glowing eyes locking onto the source of the attack. "Move!" Noah shouted, leading the group into the rubble-strewn streets. The creatures let out guttural shrieks and gave chase, their spindly limbs carrying them with terrifying speed. The drones followed, scanning the area and firing bursts of energy that narrowly missed their targets. The diversion team's job was simple but deadly. Keep the enemy occupied for as long as possible. They ran through the ruined town, setting off traps and creating chaos. Each second they bought gave Lydia and Kael more time to reach the conduit. In the heart of the town, the alien conduit loomed like a grotesque monument. Its spires pulsed with blue energy, sending beams of light into the sky. The air crackled with electricity, and the ground beneath it hummed with a deep, ominous vibration. Around it, dozens of creatures patrolled in synchronized patterns, their movements eerily precise. Kael, Lydia, and Darius crept through the shadows, staying low to avoid detection. "We need to get close enough to plant the charges," Kael whispered. "Stay quiet and follow my lead." Lydia's heart pounded as they approached the base of the conduit. The creatures were terrifying up close, tall and skeletal, with glowing eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness. Lydia focused on her breathing, trying to steady her nerves. Darius signaled that the path was clear, and they moved swiftly to the conduit's base. Kael began attaching the charges, her movements practiced and precise. Lydia did the same, her fingers fumbling slightly as she secured the explosives. Just as they were finishing, a low metallic growl echoed behind them. Lydia turned slowly, her blood running cold. One of the creatures had spotted them. It let out a shriek, alerting the others. "Go! Now!" Kael shouted, raising her weapon and firing at the advancing creature. Darius joined her, covering Lydia as she sprinted away from the conduit. The creatures swarmed toward them, their movements frantic and aggressive. Kael grabbed her communicator. "Charges are set. Get out of here. Now." Lydia reached the edge of the battlefield, her lungs burning as she climbed onto a collapsed wall for a better view. Kael and Darius were still fighting, their energy weapons lighting up the darkness. The conduit pulsed erratically, the charges disrupting its energy flow. Kael's voice crackled over the communicator. "Lydia, we're clear. Detonate the charges." Lydia hesitated, her thumb hovering over the detonator. Kael and Darius were still in the line of fire. "You're not." "Far enough," she shouted. "We don't have time." Kael's voice was sharp. "Do it now." With a shaky breath, Lydia pressed the button. For a moment there was silence. Then, the conduit erupted in a blinding explosion, sending a shockwave that rippled through the town. The creatures let out deafening screeches as the energy that powered them dissipated. One by one they collapsed, their bodies crumpling into lifeless heaps. The alien ships above faltered, their glowing underbellies flickering. One of the larger ships began to descend uncontrollably, crashing into the ruins with an earth-shaking impact. The remaining ships, crippled and disoriented, began to retreat, their engines roaring as they disappeared into the sky. The dawn broke over the ruined town, casting a pale light on the destruction. Lydia, Mia, Noah, and a handful of survivors emerged from their hiding places, their faces marked with exhaustion and grief. The air was still, the alien threat seemingly gone. Kael limped toward them, her weapon slung over her shoulder. Her expression was tired but triumphant. "You did it," she said to Lydia, her voice filled with a rare note of respect. "We did it," Lydia replied, though her heart ached for the lives lost. Noah looked at the horizon, where faint plumes of smoke still rose. "Do you think they'll come back?" Kael's gaze was steely. "Maybe, but next time, we'll be ready." As the group began to rebuild what little they could, Lydia looked up at the sky. The stars that had once seemed so peaceful now felt like harbingers of the unknown. But for the first time in days, there was hope, and hope was a powerful weapon.